right, so let's talk about some key concepts with lean. First one would be waste reduction. Basically, what you're attempting to do is look at a process and define which steps are value add, which are business value add, and which are non-value add. So value add would basically be the steps that the customer would actually be willing to pay for. Business value add are things that you have to do either from a legal standpoint or certainly mostly regulatory, but also HR compliance and those types of things. Just things you have to do because you're operating a business. And then the last piece is non-value add. Non-value add is anything you're doing that the customer would not be willing to pay for that you don't have to do. So the goal over time is basically to reduce the non-value added work, to free yourself up to do more value added work. And the way you do that is through a process called Kaizen, which basically means small incremental change. There's a lot of other ways of doing it. There's larger scale improvement ideas that you can implement. The problem with those a lot of times is they're harder to sustain. They're also harder to predict how they're going to actually improve things. So the best case scenario is that waste reduction comes through very small incremental daily changes that add up to very, very large improvements over time. The next one I'll mention here would be value stream thinking. So value stream thinking, the best way for me to describe it is use a Toyota example. Is basically most other car companies, the way they build their cars is they'll have the marketing group work with a design group and come up with, here's a new vision for a car. They hand that plan off to the engineering group. The engineering group tinkers with it and says, there's no way we can build this. Here's the changes we have to make. Then it goes back and forth a little bit. And then they hand that final version over to production. And then production says, we can't possibly make this car at a cost that we could sell it at, right? So now production has to deal with all of those changes that were recommended, yada, yada, yada. So on it goes. And suddenly you've got all these different silos operating independently with each other. So that final version that you come up with is actually not really the optimal car. It's just the car you end up with, right? Because then after production, you have to have procurement look at it and decide which suppliers to use, all that. So value stream thinking, instead of organizing folks functionally, you actually will take 5 or 6 design folks and 25 engineers and 10 production folks, and you put them on the 2025 Camry team, and they're going to work together for the next probably decade, that group of people, and they're going to work in the same area, and they are going to wake up and go to sleep every night not thinking about engineering or about design or about production. They're going to wake up thinking about that 2025 Camry. Like, that's what their focus is, right? So that becomes a value stream for Toyota, is that new product line. And once that product line goes into production, that same group of people, now they're looking out on the production line and dealing with issues and coming up with things. So just imagine for a second if you instead of thinking about your specific job function, if you were allowed to think about a project that you were working on as part of a larger team. Imagine how differently you would think. It's no longer, well, I did my part, I'm going to hand it off to the next guy. Suddenly it's like, oh no, like we're all in this together, right? And the success of this crosses over, my individual job function. So the concept of value stream thinking, and it's certainly, bigger than I'm giving it credit for, but one of the key components of it is you kind of all are taking responsibility for that value stream instead of I'm fulfilling a job function as part of, I'm just a cog in the wheel, right? Next up, continuous improvement. We talked about it a little bit with waste reduction, but this is just basically, again, that relentless approach of I'm going to wake up every day and think about how do we do this better, right? And you're going to fail some high percentage of the time, right? But you're also going to learn through failure. So You learn through something called the PDCA cycle: plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, check, adjust. Basically, what you're looking at here is, you guys heard all this. I know Clint taught you this, but basically, come up with a plan, which is a radical concept, right? But like, what are we going to do today? And then you do that plan, and then you say, okay, well, how did we compare? So we check, how was our plan versus what we actually did? And then the act or the adjust step is, let's revise the plan for tomorrow. Let's adjust things. Next up, people engagement. Speaking from my time at LeanCore and certainly the folks at Toyota, you are not only expected to, but you're almost required to provide your input on how things could be done better. So the concept that Toyota uses is basically, the smartest person to answer questions about how the production line runs is not some industrial engineer. I'm sorry to all the engineers in class, but the smartest person to answer that question is the person that actually works on the line. Like, they are the experts, and we hold them up and their opinion up as kind of the gold standard, and we have to talk them into things. We don't have to tell them why their ideas are wrong. We have to prove why they wouldn't work or something. And the way you do that is through trying things out, right? So you have to turn on your employee's brain. You have to get them thinking about these things. Otherwise, you're wasting a ton of knowledge, right? And that is absolutely your competitive advantage. So I mentioned the tours earlier, the TMMK tours. Toyota lets other car companies come into their and take like very extensive tours. Toyota let GM do a joint venture with them that lasted probably 15-20 years. Like, Toyota's not scared of other people learning their secret, because their secret has been right in front of them the whole time, and that is, when their employees come to work every day, they think about, how do we do this better? What do we need to do to actually make this process better? So a quick story on that people engagement piece. I'm pretty passionate on the people engagement side, if you can't tell, but back right after World War II, Toyota had started making trucks during the war. The economy was severely depressed in Japan. Obviously, there was a ton of reparations, and they're rebuilding the country. People weren't buying trucks, and so Toyota was going under. They were going out of business, and so they hold this all employee meeting, and they bring everyone in, and they say, listen, guys, like, we're going to have to shut this place down. Like, we're done. And the employees like, whoa, what's going on, right? And they said, there's one possibility. We're either closing the doors today, we're all done, or everyone in this room is going to commit to something. So the management is going to commit to lifetime employment for all of the employees that work here. The employees are like, okay, well, that sounds really good. But the employees are going to commit to, when they see something that's incorrect or that could be better, they have to bring those to our attention so that we can solve those together, right? Just a massive, massive change in approach to how most companies work, where, well, I don't want to share this idea, it might save so much time that they get rid of me or whatever. Toyota has the exact opposite approach for their employees. Like, you have to share those ideas. You have the secret to how we're going to be a better company next week, next year, next decade, right? So it's just a really powerful tool. I would encourage you to do it. You have to be careful with the company you're working in, with the culture you're operating in, but at least when you start managing people, make it a safe place within your team, the team of people you're managing, to share ideas, and do not hold it against people, but reward them for it, even if it's just through recognition and praise. It is one of the keys and secrets to good management, in my opinion. Next up is quality at the source. I'll include a link to a short little speech. There's a guy named Mike Hoseas that's actually, he was at TMMK. He gave a talk I heard a while back. It's really cool. Quality at the source is basically, we don't let defects pass. So his talk is about his experience learning about what quality at the source means from his time in training on the Toyota production line. Stability and standardization, it's kind of the foundation. You can see the house of lean here. You cannot measure how things have improved or gotten worse if you don't have a stable process operating underneath of that process, right? So, the entire foundation of the house is honestly having a stable and standardized process operating throughout. That's step one, is kind of building that stability into the process. All right, I am not going to spend time on this because I know that you heard about these. I think downtime is the approach that Lean Core uses. There's a lot of different ways of looking at it. I learned Tim Woods a long time ago, TIMWOODS. But yeah, I'm not going to spend time on it. I already said that. So, all right. So a few applications in the supply chain when it comes to lean. The first one here is standardization. So I talked about like EDI transactions. There's a lot of other ways of kind of noting standardization opportunities, but basically, especially when there's multiple companies involved, you have to have a standard process so that everyone knows every time this happens, every time the truck shows up, every time the part gets ordered, all of those things, there's a standard in place. That's critical. Stability, figuring out what is causing variation, and do your best to avoid those or minimize those as much as possible. So a lot of the demand management and order fulfillment and a lot of those steps we talked about in class, in the first half of the class, really talked about variation, the impact of variation. Lean has a relentless pursuit towards stability, right? You're never going to get perfect, especially with omni-channel and customization and all these things. You're always going to fight against that, but doing everything you can to provide stability in your operation is absolutely critical. Next up, with just-in-time, basically all you're trying to do once you have a stable process in place is order just enough to get you through to the next delivery. You have to you have to have a stable environment. So like Toyota has tires and wheels delivered less than an hour before they're going to be used on the line, right? The only way they can do that is because they have a standard process and a stable process in place. A few more applications. This one's called Jidoka, or intelligent automation. I really like when these processes get implemented. Being a software guy, the best case scenario for us, when you have the opportunity to build some software, the best case scenario is the process that you're automating has already been tested out and is kind of clear. And so what you're automating is a well-defined and clear process. And you're doing the automation basically to cut out errors and just to make things more efficient. That's definitely the Toyota approach, as opposed to like, let's put in 1,000 robots and hopefully they'll figure out how to weld a car together, right? They only do that when they know specifically what the standard work is and how it should be implemented. Respect for people, again, I think I've harped on that enough, but just to say it again, basically require them to help solve problems. Basically say to your employees, I trust your opinion enough that I'm going to listen to you when you have ideas. And then a relentless focus on the customer, like what is valuable, how do we address that with you, or how do we provide that to you at the lowest cost possible. That's a huge focus of lean and should be our focus really across the supply chain. So a few notes on inventory carrying costs. I know we talked about it in the total landed cost or total cost modeling, but just want to describe it again really briefly. Inventory carrying cost is basically a number that every company comes to an agreement on, basically establishing this is how much we consider it to cost us to hold inventory. There's a much better way of saying that than just using the words in the definition, but essentially, how much of our money are we spending just keeping this inventory? That was no better. All right. So typical components of inventory carrying costs, certainly the cost of capital and the storage costs, like the physical holding of that inventory, but you also have a ton of obsolescence and damage, especially if you're dealing with anything perishable like food, taxes and insurance. You actually have to pay more insurance and more taxes the more inventory you're holding. And every time you move parts around in a warehouse, you're spending money that you shouldn't because of all the extra inventory. So we actually measured in one warehouse that I was kind of observing in and doing some work in. We actually measured one pallet got moved 17 times over the course of its time in the warehouse. If that pallet wasn't in the warehouse, those parts certainly weren't needed. None of those moves would have been necessary, right? And think what else we could have accomplished during that time, right? So the reason I bring up inventory carrying costs again, that is kind of one of the ways you're measuring the impact of your efforts to reduce inventory from a lean perspective. So I wanted to hit on this again. If you're ever in a position, someone says, well, we're going to eventually use that inventory. Like, well, there are some costs that go along with holding all of that inventory, and I'd like to address those, right? So just kind of stick a pin in this one and think about it as you kind of move on down throughout your career. So the next topic is agile supply chain. So this one is much more of an emerging concept. There's not like entire classes or workshops. I guess there's a workshop on it. There's not entire classes around agile at this point. It's not fully defined, still being developed. It's really focusing on your ability to react and adapt. So basically just a continual re-optimization of process. So knowing over time that processes change and demands change and customers change and all that, basically how quickly can you react to your customers' changes. It's definitely based more on information and less on inventory. So the focus is let's gather as much information as we can and move as quickly as we can on the least amount of that information, as opposed to lean's efforts around let's move with the least amount of inventory possible. It does require a very free flow of information between partners. So you think about like the beer game scenario. How great would it have been if everyone knew demand? In an agile environment, you have to establish a very free flow of information across partners. And it's really designed for super high variability, high variety supply chain. So tons of customization, tons of demand changes based on factors outside of your control. You're going to be forced into an agile environment and hopefully see the benefits of it. You focus really heavily, and we talked about this in the presentations last week. You're going to focus very heavily on postponement as well as just keeping that manufacturing flexibility as late in the process as possible. Your goal here is to win on service, not so much cost. So you may compete on cost. You don't want cost to run out of control, but you're winning by delivering on time. So your customer's like, whoa, I had a custom whatever built and it got here within 3 days. That's how you succeed in the agile supply chain. So just a quick comparison here. Lean works really, really well on commodities or any type of repeatable orders. We're going to make 1,000 Camrys today. Lean is absolutely the right choice. Agile works best on customizable products. So I know fast fashion is not an attractive word right now, but things that you're producing, I know like Nike shoes get used a lot to explain this. Just anything where you're doing a ton of customization That's really what Agile is designed for. Lean works the best again in predictable markets. We know roughly how many cars or sofas we're going to need in the next quarter. Agile works best in volatile markets. Like, we don't know how many of these are going to sell. It depends on how this athlete performs at the All-Star game, for example, right? So you really don't have a good way of predicting what's going to happen. Lean also works well in long product life cycles. Agile works very effectively when there's a really short product life cycle. So when, again, not only can you not predict when the spike is coming, you also can't predict when the drop in demand is coming. If your customer is looking for the lowest cost, Lean is definitely the right framework to be thinking about. If your customer wants products, especially customized products, to be available, then Agile would be the correct approach. Lean works best with low variety, so few color options. Put all of your other options into packages like LE, XLE, SE, etc. Agile works best in high variety opportunities. So we had a forklift manufacturer that had like 2,000 finished SKUs that they could actually deliver. They had, one company wanted pink forklifts that they purchased during Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Like, okay, that's a new SKU for us, right? So they had that on the record, and people could order that over time, right? So anytime you get into really, really high variety customization, Agile is definitely the best option. When there's low margins and you're fighting for every penny, Lean tends to be the direction that you'll go. If there's higher margins, where there's an opportunity to do provide that highly custom experience, and then your customers reward you for that, Agile obviously is going to be superior. If physical cost is dominant, really related to the point above, but just keeping those physical costs low, Lean would be the preferred method. And then if there's more cost associated with how are you making your customers aware and selling them on your product, Agile could be the better method. And then the last one here, with Lean, you are buying materials, right? Pretty typical, basically everything we've discussed all semester. That's kind of what you're looking at. With Agile, it's more about assigning capacity to particular parts of the supply chain. So you don't know what you're going to make and when you're going to need it, but you have folks available and ready to respond when that demand comes, right? I would expect I don't think the Lean conversation will change dramatically in the next 5 years. I think, we've got several decades of experience with it. I would expect a ton of effort and energy to be put towards the Agile supply chain over especially the next 5 to 10 years, with 3D manufacturing coming online, making it a lot easier to produce custom experiences a lot quicker. I think this class will look a lot different in 5 or 10 years based on Agile and its approach. So, believe it or not, that is actually the end of our class. So again, certainly a pleasure getting to know all of you guys this semester. Feel free to reach out if you ever have questions, comments. I really do appreciate your feedback. So if you do have a few minutes to take those course evaluations, I read them. I have a top 10 list of funniest things people have said, or anytime there's any kind of improvement idea, I do take that to heart. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I would appreciate the more constructive or critical you can be. I don't even care about constructive. Be destructive. I don't care. Just provide me with some feedback so I can adjust things going forward and make the class more effective. So as a fellow UK MBA, certainly appreciate the difficulty that you guys have been through over the last year. Certainly looking forward to hearing about your recruiting, where you end up, all that. But looking forward, you're certainly part of the alumni group now, so please feel free to connect. Anything I can do to help you, let me know. And have a good time at the Supply Chain Forum. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.